This Shabbat, I will not talk about Parashat HaShavua. You know it, and anyway, Mimi does a fabulous job in the morning. A few weeks ago, our rabbi inspired me when he talked about Pinchas, his leadership, responsibilities, and zealotry. I decided to explore some more, and my talk is the result of that study. The most zealot character in the Bible is, of course, God, whose one of his emanations is that of zealotry. He is El Nakam, God of vengeance. However, God's other emanations are Hanun Berachum, compassionate and merciful. Can we reconcile the two polar characteristics? My talk will attempt to answer this ostensible dichotomy. Today, Dvar Torah takes on two contradictory personalities. I'm talking about Pinchas and Elijah. Parashat Pinchas is fragmented and collated, comprising at least two stories. One concerns the Moabite women and the other the Midianite women. According to Exodus 6:25, Pinchas was the grandson of Aaron, that is a Levite. Many years later, in Parashat Pinchas, we encounter him sitting among the congregation in front of the tent of meeting, crying out of frustration, not knowing how to react to the apostasy before their eyes. 2 verses later, the narrator implies that the lamenting was connected to an unknown plague in which 24,000 people perished. As they cry, an unnamed Israelite man, later recognized as Zimri, son of Salu, the head of Shimonite clan, brings an unnamed Midianite woman before the congregation. Her name is later recognized as Cosbi, daughter of Tzu, a Midianite princess. What actually did Zimri do? Did he sacrifice her in public to the Midianite gods? Was he intimate with her in public to provoke the congregation? The narrator wants us to believe that a most idolatrous act was performed in public that called for a drastic response. Pinchas the Levite gets up and, repeating what his tribal fellows did in the aftermath of the golden calf, picks up a sword and kills the man and the woman. And the plague stops. Unlike in the previous episode, Pinchas acts automatically. No one ordered him to act. He is burning with zeal for God. He is the judge and the executioner. By this act, God declares Pinchas' zealotry saved the Israelite people from his wrath and annihilation. God describes Pinchas' act in the phrase, when he was zealot for my zealotry, Bekan'o et kin'ati. Remember this phrase, Bekan'o et kin'ati. For this improvised murder of two people and for saving the people, God rewards Pinchas with two blessings, an everlasting priesthood and a covenant of peace. Zealotry for God is welcomed and rewarded. But this is not always the case when an individual takes the law into his hands because of a similar burst of emotions. We all know the prophet Elijah. We praise him every Havdalah. We open the door for him every Pesach Seder and offer him wine. The Sandak sits on Elijah's chair at the circumcision of a newborn. He appears mysteriously to help the hapless individual. He did not die because God took him. He will usher the Messiah and bring peace and love between fathers and sons. The stories about his deeds appear in all our literature, from the biblical narratives and the prophet Malachi to the Talmud, the Midrashim, and the Zohar. So what's the problem? Elijah appears with no introduction. He suddenly appears, and he suddenly disappears. Why? Because when the narratives were written down, he was already larger than life. Everyone knew him, and no introduction was called for. We don't know his father's name or hometown, but only his region, the Gilad. Hatishbi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, is not the name of a town, but a corruption of a word. He first appears as an angry prophet who informs King Ahab of an approaching drought in the land without specifying for how long. The reason given is that the king is a sinner. But why would the people suffer because of Ahab's Baal worship? Elijah claims that this prediction is his own words. Unlike Pinchas, Elijah seems to care less about the suffering of his people. Soon, Elijah hides in the home region of the Gilad, but not among his family members. Was he ostracized? The ravens bring him food and water. But the drought catches up with him, and he must leave the parched land to find shelter in Sofat, a Sidonian town in the north, where today is Lebanon. But why does he go to a town controlled by his nemesis, Jezebel's royal family? But more so, Sidon, a Phoenician town, suffers also from the drought. And yet God sent him there. Did God intend to punish him for his indifference to the suffering of the many? Upon reaching Tzofat, he meets a widow who will become his landlady. Elijah sees her poverty, but orders her to give him water and bread. She answered that she has so little flour and oil that it will suffice only for her son and herself, after which they'll die. Elijah is not touched. He orders her to make him a cake before she attends to her son and herself. Elijah is so arrogant and obnoxious that God intervenes and miraculously flour and oil fill the widow's kitchen for many days. After that miracle, the landlady's son becomes seriously ill, while Elijah resides in the upper chamber. The commotion doesn't disturb him until she confronts him and accuses him of apathy. He takes the boy to his room, prays to God to save him, and the boy revives. In the third year of the drought and famine, God tells Elijah to appear before Ahab to inform him of the end of the drought. Elijah goes to Samaria, the capital of the kingdom of Israel, where King Ahab resides. Samaria still suffers from severe famine. Instead of confronting the king in person, as he commanded, and he was commanded, Elijah meets Obadiah, a man devoted to God who has been sustaining 100 Yahwistic prophets in 2 caves. He tells Obadiah to inform the king, "Here is Elijah." He knows that if Obadiah conveys this message without proof, he will be killed. Elijah has no choice but to walk toward Ahab, who is looking for water to survive. After exchanging harsh words, Elijah orders Ahab to assemble on Mount Carmel all of Israel, and the 450 Baal prophets and the 400 Asherah prophets, the private clergy of Queen Jezebel. Ahab follows Elijah's instructions, but cannot bring Jezebel's private prophets. Perhaps he had no authority over them. There, on Mount Carmel, Elijah challenges the Baal prophets to beg their God to bring rain to end the drought. Gashing themselves with knives and spears as blood streams over them does not convince Baal to respond to his worshippers. The God of rain did not bring rain. Elijah wins the challenge. He orders the people who vowed their devotion to God to catch all the Baal prophets. He leads them down to the Kishon River, where he slaughters 450 people. It must have been a macabre sight. God did not ask Elijah to murder them. It was his act of zealotry that took several hours of slaughtering. It was another act Elijah committed on his own. Calmly, he turns to King Ahab and orders him to go home. Eat and drink, for rain is coming soon. Jezebel is furious and promises to kill him. Elijah escapes to Beersheba. He is certain that Moses will have supported his action. But he forgets that Moses killed only one person in his youth, the Egyptian who killed an Israelite. People who were killed in the wilderness were commanded by God as punishment for idolatry, like the case of the Levites killing those who worship the golden calf. Elijah walks 40 days to Mount Sinai to reenact Moses' experience and get God's blessing. But God needs to teach Elijah a lesson. None bless and reward him, as he did to Pinchas. God asks Elijah for the reason he came there. The reason recalls God's words to describe Pinchas' killing of the Israelite and the Midianite. For he was zealous for my zeal. Remember, kano kaneti. Elijah answers in similar words. For I have been extremely zealous to God, or in Hebrew, kano kineti. The God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken their covenant, your covenant. They destroyed your altars and killed your prophets by the sword, and I alone have survived, and now they want to take my life. Elijah plays the victim. He does not mention the famine and the drought he caused, the murder of innocent Israelites by Queen Jezebel, or the return of many Israelites to God. Everyone is guilty except himself. He wants God's protection and affirmation. But God disapproves of Elijah's acts. God appears to Elijah not face to face, but through three natural emanations: a storm, an earthquake, and fire. These are but phenomena of destructions. Then, a sound of a faint silence appears, a gentle sound, a calming sound of chesed, an inspiring sound of goodness and compassion. No, God does not operate through destructive measures. God teaches the zealous prophet that he disapproves of his conduct throughout his prophecy years. Elijah thought he would convince the Israelites to return to Adonai by violence and destruction. God teaches Elijah that compassion and kindness are the divine way. Elijah failed God. It was time for him to exit this world. In other words, God had enough of him. God gives Elijah the final mission, but does not disclose that he will not carry that out. God tells him to anoint 2 people to be kings, which he does not let him fulfill. The only mission he allows him to accomplish is to transfer his prophetic spirit to a younger man who loves his parents and cares for his employees, Elisha. Elijah knows he will die in a day or 2, but he wants to die on Mount Nebo, where Moses died. God disapproves again and grants him a way out by taking him in a storm of to heaven. Perhaps Elijah's zealous spirit will find a lasting repose. Ultimately, Elijah is not blessed or rewarded like Pinchas. Their motivation mode of operation, and reaction are far apart. The narrative about Elijah is a lesson to all of us to act in moderation, to care first for our people, not to act spontaneously without considering the consequences, to teach God's love and compassion, and most of all, not to idolize people with extreme conduct. Each of us carries that sound of a faint silence, that divine chesed, to respond to individuals in need of support. For example, to sponsor young people who cannot afford higher education or donate to people with health problems. I do not know why Elijah has received such an exalted and honorable place in our tradition. No doubt he was a famous character in his days. Yet Enoch, the other character who also did not die but was taken to God by God, has no such adulation. If not for the Dead Sea Scrolls and the occasional mention in predominantly Christian literature, we would not have known about his divine status. All I can say is, God knows why. Nevertheless, do not stop singing Aman about Elijah in your Havdalah ceremony. Shabbat Shalom.